Welcome back to another B-Sides breakdown and the last one for the 2022-2023 NBA season, as the Nuggets have now beat the Miami Heat in 5 games, as I predicted a few episodes ago. And as we carry on, I'm now just going to turn over to Wilson. Wilson, what are kind of your thoughts? Now that the series is over, we can really just kind of look back and see, what came true that we were seeing before, what didn't. What's kind of just your big takeaways to start?
Drake called this the last one. I'm also going to call this one the sad one. Very, very sad with this end result. Drake and I were talking a little bit before we started recording here, and to me, even though I'm not a fan of either of these teams particularly, you grow fond of certain players, as well as when we kind of talk about these sports games and predict who's going to win, we have an added level of stake into all of these matchups. And for me to be so high on the Heat, the cookies really just not, fall their way this series, and I can't really make any excuses for the Heat. The Nuggets ultimately proved to have the better talent. They obviously had a lot more size, and ultimately some of the intangibles that I thought the Heat were going to be able to take advantage of kind of fell in favor of the Nuggets, and we can kind of go over the list of reasons of why that may or may not be, but the truth is, Miami's hustle, the Nuggets were able to hustle just as well as them. Miami's coaching, Mike Malone and the Nuggets staff did as about as good of a job as Eric Spoelstra did in this series. I give them all the credit in the world. And if we look at the superstars, I thought Jimmy Butler was going to be a huge player in the series. I thought he was going to have one or two of those Jimmy Butler games where he's just unstoppable and carries the Heat to a win. In reality, he had 0 of those. Jokic and Murray combined for at least 4 of those because they won 4 of the games. And yeah, again, congratulations to the Denver Nuggets, something that I would not have predicted before the series. I would not have predicted it at any point in the playoffs. I was low on them all year, and I was proven wrong. A sad day for me, Drake. And congratulations to the Heat as well for a good run. Not good enough. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel right now. I'm just really sad.
Yeah, I think my takeaway mainly was I think if I'm the Heat, though, I'm not sad at all about this. You have a really solid young core. You get the most out of all your players, and now that you're starting to show that you can contend again, I think there's a good argument that free agents, who wouldn't want to go live in Miami, right, and play basketball? That's a lot of players' dreams. Great city to live in, as well as really young team with amazing coaching and solid depth. But to go over to the Nuggets, then I think this is the start of their window now, I think is kind of what I thought of watching this series, is they have a good core. And a lot of the guys they have signed on contract still, and Jokic is obviously staying there. I will say the one thing about Nikola Jokic watching this series, it made me realize how unbelievably good as a basketball player is, but it kind of reminded me sort of the Andrew Luck vein of, superstar, where he's just really good at basketball. There's all the jokes, you see the interviews of his teammates being like, if he wasn't this good at basketball and could make millions, he wouldn't be doing it, because this isn't his life like a lot of these guys. Nikola Jokic, it's scary how good he is with, and again, I'm not saying he doesn't put in the work, but the fact that he obviously, him and his teammates have said that, this isn't what he lives for, like a lot of these guys. So to be that dominant, I think is unbelievable. And I think genuinely I could see a guy like Jokic wanting to retire early. He's from Serbia, so, being overseas sucks. You're away from all your family, and I know he flies him out a ton, but still, I think the Nuggets for the next 4 or 5 years are going to be a contender, and I think they are going to be maybe the best team in the West the next few years. And I honestly don't even think they need to do that much to keep the roster good. Me and Wilson were kind of joking about how they're already releasing articles, what the Nuggets can do to prepare for next year, what the Heat are doing, already at, 11, 20, 30 minutes after the game's over. And I think my biggest takeaway from that is, honestly, I think they're a contender if they don't do anything. Aaron Gordon proved that he's a really solid player, amazing two-way player. I'd compare him to Paul George Jr. in terms of, it's not as good of a scorer, but defensively I'd say he's just as solid. Michael Porter Jr. still hasn't seen a shot he doesn't like. Jamal Murray solidified himself as a solid passer, even with his offensive struggles. Bruce Brown shot 14 shots somehow. Christian Braun played amazing. They were putting him up to 20 minutes a game by the end of the series. If I'm a Nuggets fan, this is probably the best time genuinely ever to be a Nuggets fan in their entire history, which is a little crazy of me to say, and some people might disagree, but I just don't see how you do. That is such a talented roster, and I agree with Wilson. I'd been undervaluing them all year, and I really don't know how, now that I'm looking at how really well they played. I just guess it was more I was scared of, to see how they play in the moment.
I think you did a really good job of summing up kind of where the Nuggets kind of stand at looking into their future. And to you and I, while we may have undervalued the Nuggets, I think if you kind of take a step back and look at it from a higher level perspective, you might have been able to see this coming. Obviously, the Nuggets had that run to the conference finals a couple years ago, and then given the injuries to Porter and Murray, the healthy Nuggets roster is incredibly talented. I've always said, from a roster depth standpoint, the Nuggets have 7 or 8 deep players, and it's not just, general depth. The Nuggets have 7 or 8 really good basketball players, 7 or 8 guys that would start on any given roster. And when you look at their core of Jokic, Murray, Porter Jr., and Aaron Gordon, none of those guys are even close to 30. And so they're going to be able to run that back with that core for the next couple of years, most definitely. And I think given the style of play that Jokic plays with, I think a lot of veteran guys that want to win might find Denver to be a desirable destination. Obviously, as a city, its appeal, it might not be as good as other of the big names, LA, New York, Miami, but I think just playing with a superstar that is that unselfish and just the system that the Nuggets play within can be super appealing to veterans that are looking to try to win a ring or just stay competitive in the West. If we look to the Miami side of this, I think I'm a little lower than you might be on Miami's future moving forward. As much as I like their core, and a lot has been made about their undrafted players, I think at one point Miami is going to kind of reach a climax where, and I don't really want to say it this way, but I think we saw Jimmy Butler really wear down over the course of these playoffs. And whether it be if he was injured or if just, the grueling Milwaukee series, the Boston series was just getting to the team and kind of their psyche, Jimmy Butler really wore down is what it looked like in these finals. I don't think he's a guy that was going to shrink away in the moment. We know he didn't do that in the 2020 finals. And for Butler to really not have a single standout game, Bam was giving an A-plus effort out there every single night. And he was stumbling his way to, 20, 25 points a game. But the truth is that wasn't enough for Miami, and Bam wasn't able to do it on high enough efficiency in order to make the shot attempts worth it. And so when I look at Miami and its core, I think Miami's a piece away still. As much as I like their run and how improbable it seems to be, I think if the Heat were to run it back again with the same roster, I think there'd be some different outcomes in some of these series, especially under the assumption that a lot of other teams in the East are going to be moving some pieces this offseason.
Yeah, the Heat remind me kind of the sort of Toronto Raptors teams the Raptors had for so long with DeRozan and Lowry, where they were always a piece away, but they never seemed to get that piece. But seeing Eric Spoelstra as he's been coaching, they were never afraid to go get that other piece. They gave D Wade Shaq, then they made the big three, right? And now with Jimmy Butler, they've kind of gone out and found premier talent. Again, made Duncan Robinson the highest paid undrafted player ever. So I just think they aren't scared, though, to do that. And that's kind of why I'm high on them more as recent history rather than, what they actually are right now.
Absolutely, and I don't want to overlook the Tyler Hero factor. You and I don't like to play the game of what ifs too much, but the Hero situation was a sticky one, and one that I was kind of confused about going into tonight's game. Spoelstra had announced that he was being upgraded to questionable, and a lot of people expected Hero to play. Obviously, he didn't see the floor, and, given how poor Miami's offense really looked in the series, right? It wasn't the defense that was the issue, it's the offense. You do wonder if Hero makes it a different look, but I think you're right. Just given the history of Spoelstra and Riley, I wonder if they want to run it back and just say, if Hero's healthy out there, we might see a different outcome, or if they do decide to shake it up. I think if we look at some of the major pieces that contributed, Kyle Lowry was as good as you could have asked a 37-year-old point guard off your bench to play. I really respect it, and I think tonight especially, that championship pedigree really shone through. He wasn't the most efficient, but the shots he was hitting was really when Miami needed some 9-1-1 buckets, and so, again, I give Lowry a ton of credit. That being said, he's 37, one of the oldest players in the league. I don't know if that's replicable next year, and who am I to say that, right? We've got Bron and Steph looking like they're still in their kind of second half of their prime era right now, but I think Miami does have to make some changes if they want to contend again, but I'm with you. I think they will make some changes, and I think, a lot has been made about, is Jimmy Butler really a superstar? I think he is. I don't think these finals are really an indictment on him as a player, because I don't think the moment was too big. I just think something behind the scenes was a little off. But he's shown us time and time again that he shows up when it matters. So I'm still going to believe in Jimmy Butler.
No, same here. I saw Stephen A today saying that he's not a superstar, and I just think that's silly to pretty much single-handedly will two teams to the finals is more than what a superstar does. So I kind of disagree with that. But again, like I've said, I think if I'm Miami, though, the reason I'm not scared is I think if you give Kyrie Irving, even a guy like a D'Angelo Russell, right? That's not a high-tier superstar, but that's someone who can facilitate offense, right? D'Angelo Russell, fantastic passer, great three-point shooter, right? So I think there are plenty of players. Fred VanVleet also declined his option with the Raptors. So I think there's plenty of players that you could put next to him that then could help, just because, again, I think that's what it was, is like you said, there was something behind the scenes. I think it might have been a combo of his ankle and being exhausted, going from the play-in to playing the 1 seed to then again a really talented 76ers team. I mean, they really just had to fight to even make it to the finals. And we talked about before the series, rest versus trial by fire, and I think we just kind of saw that the rest helps at the end of the day, because even though Jamal Murray and Porter Jr., right, they kind of tweaked their ankles, they were more rested. Their bodies adjusted better, and I just don't think the Heat did.
And as you and I can kind of touch on here, our least favorite part of the outcome of all of this, and that's kind of the Jokic factor and kind of the conversation around where does Nikola Jokic fit, not just in today's NBA, but also, not to be exaggerative, but in NBA history. This truly was one of the most dominant runs to the finals and to winning the ring that we've seen in recent history. And I think you and I have both notoriously kind of doubted Jokic's ability and doubted him on the offensive end, said he's not a great defender, not really believed in his style of basketball being able to win the ring. Obviously, we were both proven entirely wrong on that statement. And when I kind of look around the league right now, my gut still wants to say that Giannis is the best player in the world. I just think the two-way impact of Giannis and the dominance he's able to play with on a nightly basis, I think the shot is kind of overrated at times. And while it is kind of a big limitation, I don't think it's enough to take him out of that conversation. That being said, I think Jokic has for sure put his name in the hat. I would have said if Jimmy Butler had won the finals, that Butler had a case to it, primarily because he would have beaten Nikola Jokic. And for Jokic to win the finals quite easily, honestly, with Game 2 looking like the fluke in this 5-game series, I think Jokic has to have a name in that hat. As well as I just think if we look at him historically, and you and I can talk about this later more in depth on a different podcast, but I think Jokic is now putting himself in that hat with the most elite names in NBA history. Again, the run was just so dominant, and now when we look at him, he's going to have a finals MVP, 2-time MVP, a case that he could have won this year's. I think, we've said it over and over again, but Denver has an incredibly bright future, and that is on the back of Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, no, and I think, like I said, he's definitely in my top 5 current players right now in terms of, the level they're playing at. You can't say he's not top 5 after this run. And as well as I think more so than anything is, I think if he wins another ring, there's already an argument for him being the best big of the 20th century. If you count Duncan, obviously, Duncan has to, but, I think at this point I'd take him over KG. I don't know if that's a hot take, but in terms of winning as the guy, KG could never do it in Minnesota. And, he had some talent behind him. Don't get me wrong, not nearly as talented as a roster as Denver this year, but I think he's already creeping his way into one of the best bigs of the 2000s. Obviously, I don't think anything he could do almost could put him on a level of Shaq in terms of sheer dominance, but as well as, like you said, I think Giannis in terms of best player still hasn't beat, I think, with about same caliber roster, but Giannis dropped 50 points, 20 free throws, 8 blocks or whatever it was. So again, but I don't think it's crazy to say that Nikola Jokic is in that same tier as Giannis. I would definitely put him, if you're talking top caliber of player, right, the 1%, he's definitely in that group now. And I think I honestly, even as much as I hate on him, I still probably would have said he was before, but I would have said he was kind of an outlier right towards the bottom. But now I think he's cementing himself as one of the best players in the league.
Most definitely. Without sounding hyperbolic, I think historically Jokic is now putting himself in that tier below the big 5 centers, right? You'd think Shaq, Hakeem, Will, Russell, and Abdul-Jabbar, right? You'd say those are the big 5 probably. Jokic is now in that second tier. And, given the state of the NBA right now where there's not a whole lot of top-tier centers, right? There's probably a circle of 3, 4, 5 that can put their name in, we're top 5 centers. But then there's kind of a big gap. Having a center that can do it all is a huge advantage. So I do expect Jokic to be able to kind of sustain this run of dominance. I think, like to your point earlier, maybe it's more of a question of how much Jokic wants it, right? We know how much he cares about his life outside of basketball. So, the it factor that a lot of these guys have, Steph, LeBron, even KD to an extent, is just their love and their sheer willpower and what they want to do in the NBA historically. Let's see if Jokic has that gene. And I'm not here to say that he doesn't. I just am curious to see how much he does care.
Yeah, no, and I'm also too like I my favorite part of Jokic is his personality because he is so just clearly like, again, basketball is not his life, and I think that's refreshing sometimes because as fun as these personalities are, to have a dude who just really likes his family, his horses, and to play video games, but he's putting 40 points, 13 rebounds, and 8 assists on your favorite player. It's just it's a pretty funny dynamic, and it's like you said, right? I don't know how long he wants to play, but regardless of that, I think even if he retires now, he's in that caliber of player, I'd say, like almost right that Larry Bird style, where I don't think you need to play a super long time to have a great impact on this league. And I think even if he just plays another 3-4 years and retires, like you said, not many good centers in today's NBAs. He could really go down as the best center of the 3-point era. I mean, I don't think that's crazy to say.
Most definitely. And now that we've done our glazing for Nikola Jokic, the last thing I have to say here really is next season is going to be Embiid's revenge season. So
yeah.
Jokic can have his flowers now, but the league better watch out because the 76ers, doesn't matter who's on that roster, Embiid's going to be on his revenge tour.
Yeah, and it's also kind of funny. The guy who beat you guys in a finals you probably would have won is now your head coach. But I think that's good for Embiid because Kawhi Leonard had one of his best seasons ever under Nick Nurse. Nick Nurse is great at featuring a star. And look, the Raptors, he's made Pascal Siakam look like a superstar for the last few years. So I definitely think, again, we'll talk about it in a later pod, but I think next year is going to be interesting because I do think now this puts a chip on Embiid's shoulder, and especially now with the news that Harden kind of wants to go back to Houston and go back home to finish out his career. I'm going to be curious to see how they load up that roster to try and again counteract, because I do think Joel Embiid is the only player in the NBA who can go play for play with Nikola Jokic. So definitely will be interesting.
It's too bad we missed out on that finals match.
We did.
Would have been
That
a good
sucks. Yeah, that's my last thing I want to say. This finals sucked. For as fun as these playoffs were, this was a boring finals, and that's just disappointing because, I mean, man, these playoffs, one of my favorites of the last few years, honestly. Like, I had a ton of fun watching these playoffs, and then the finals, I was, like, always doing something else while watching because the games just kind of were sluggish, and even this one, really defensive focused. Neither team hit 100. God, and there was, like, no three-pointers. I don't even think they made 10 combined threes on, like, 60 attempts. It was just... yeesh.
I'm with you there, and I don't want to call Denver and Miami boring markets, but I think the truth is there just wasn't as much drama as we saw in some of those earlier rounds in the playoffs, right? Warriors-Kings basketball was as good as you can get. Even the Warriors-Lakers series, they were good games, even though sometimes the ending score might have not reflected that. These were close games, mostly wire to wire, but the truth is I think there wasn't a whole lot of entertainment factor here.
Yeah.
Game 4 of the finals had the lowest viewership since 2007, I think only behind maybe it was the bubble finals.
Yeah.
And that's just tough, you know. You've got a 2-time MVP. The Heat story is as good as it gets, and the interest just wasn't there. And I think that was both reflective of, A, the market size, but also B, just the players and the storylines just weren't as interesting. After watching the games kind of unfold, it was predictable to some extent. Maybe not for you. I guess it was for you, maybe not for I, but, to the general public too. I think just the Nuggets' dominance of the Heat was pretty boring to watch.
Yep. And well, and just to build on that, my actual last thing I'm going to say now is that... again, the NBA is a star-driven league, and that helps them a ton, and it hurts them a ton. When Nikola Jokic is your only true star besides Jimmy Butler, it's a one-on-one, right, in terms of star power, and one of them just, again, like we said, didn't show up nearly as much as we thought. So we've been spoiled so many years prior, right? When the Suns make it, it was Chris Paul and Devin Booker with a young DeAndre Ayton bringing up the rear, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Drew Holiday finally making it, Chris Middleton, right? That Milwaukee core they've been building. You had fun guys off the bench like DiVincenzo and Connaughton. Like, it just... when you're star-driven, you notice that on both sides. When there's a ton of stars, right, like those Golden State rosters, those finals always had a ton of viewership, even though they were winning in like 3 games, because you're watching Clay, Draymond, Steph, Andre Iguodala. Like, there was just so much star power, and now there just wasn't. And again, the NBA is kind of built for that, and I think we saw, again, I don't think it was, like you said, bad basketball necessarily, but I just think it was boring because of how we've been trained to watch the NBA.
Absolutely. Agree with that 100%.
And with that, I think we're going to go to a close, and so will the 2022-2023 NBA season. Please leave a like if you enjoyed and stick with us as this offseason. We have a video or a podcast coming out here soon with more of our breakdown of the season if you're curious about that. And we will see you guys next time. Later.